But looking at the supply chain and the disruptions, it's about the infrastructure. How do you get your products to market? How do you work around a bridge closure in counties? So that not only impacted not only the grain and crop farmers, but that also impacted the livestock producers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Wisenetix Podcast episode. I'm your host, Ricardo, as you know me. And as usual, we have awesome people here with us. Today is no different, and actually, it's getting even better. I have here with me today, Emily Otto-Tice. Is that how I pronounce your surname?
Yes.
Emily? Okay. I usually go with Emily only. And Emily is account manager at Lucta. Focused in the feed additive business unit. So she's basically responsible for the feed additives business here in the United States. And I have to say, I had the opportunity to meet with Emily a few times already in person, and she is one of the coolest people I've met in the agriculture industry so far. Very kind. You guys will notice as this conversation moves forward. And, every conversation with Emily is always a class. Every time we meet, I learn something new. So for a newbie like me, it's always good to have some interesting conversations with Emily. Emily, welcome.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I enjoy the conversations I've had with you, Ricardo, very much so. And hopefully today is no different. We'll learn a little bit about myself and my experiences in the industry. And I do appreciate this time again. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Emily, we start our conversations with, some introduction. So today we're going to be talking a lot about the industry, especially about the supply chain and what's the impact that it has in the industry, logistics, and, everything that is involved. So lots of great insights you guys are about to learn. But let's start learning a little bit about Emily. Who is Emily?
Well, I appreciate that. I have a very diverse background in agriculture. I actually am a farm kid. I grew up along the shores of Lake Erie in Ohio. I'm a swine nutritionist by training, and I did not come by that very easily. Like all farm kids with livestock, we had cattle, we had hogs, mixed grains operations. And actually, one of our family's primary businesses was greenhouses. So you would think that with my family background, I would have ended up in agronomy or horticulture. And I actually fell in love with the livestock. So I went to school at Ohio State, undergraduate degree in animal science and ag business. Wanted to have more impact with swine production. So I packed my bags following graduation and worked for a large integrator in Minnesota. And that was a eye-opening experience of itself back in the mid-90s with all the expansion and large swine operations that were coming into play in the United States at that time. After about 2.5 years working my way up through multiplication as well as the commercial breed to wean facilities, I got the itch to go back to school. I wanted to do more than just work on a farm. And I went to school at Michigan State, earned my master's degree in non-ruminant nutrition, focused on grow-finish swine, the early days of crystalline amino acids when, L-lysine was just coming into the marketplace. We had the old rule of thumb, like 3 pounds of lysine replaces 100 pounds of bean meal. Diet formulation was pretty simple. And I did a lot of the early work in nitrogen balance of how far can we push crystalline amino acids. So my graduate work was sponsored by an amino acid supplier, and I was working with like 10 amino acids at the time. And it was a really good introduction to swine nutrition. I absolutely fell in love with it. Fast forward a little bit, I worked in the industry for about 15 years. I didn't go straight through for my PhD. I didn't have any money in my bank account. I'm like, how am I going to survive? I need to get a job. And at that time, there were probably 20, 30 graduate students applying for the same 2 and 3 jobs. There wasn't a lot of openings. There was opportunities, but there was highly competitive marketplace for employment. I landed a job with, at that time, United Feeds, and worked as a research coordinator and learned a tremendous amount about the feed and nutrition industry, especially for swine, and a lot of good people. There's still several people there that I am still good friends with to this day. And worked it basically as a research coordinator, and my role there was, looking at the data, doing a lot of the feed and nutrition research they were doing for all stages of production in swine. They were one of the few nutrition companies that had actual commercial production facilities at two different sites, and they weren't just a couple hundred sows. I think one sow unit had 500 sows, and the other sow unit had close to 1,500. So they were definitely at that point in time large scale production fair to finish. And then after working in industry, I had a couple other career moves outside of animal nutrition for my career growth. And I decided to go back for my PhD after being in the industry for 15 years. So did that at Purdue University, and then ended doing work in immunology and poultry and swine. So I did get some bird work in, and ended up at Land O'Lakes, which moved me and my family to Iowa. And we've been here for 7 years, and I'm now in feed sale, or actually feed additive sales for Lucta, and doing technical and sales account management for the company that's looking to grow. And it's been a wonderful experience. And those are just a few things about my 20-year plus history in the swine industry.
Well, guys, as you can see, she has an extended background, and that's why I'm always learning with you, Emily. Like, if it's something new, something that it's news in the industry, or just about the infrastructure. Just before we started recording, actually, she was almost doing like some sort of consultancy with me, helping me understand the industry, and yeah. So, and well, we're going to be covering some of your experiences today, mostly in the supply chain area. But before we do this, so you have extended background in agriculture and all sorts of things. How do you think your parents are they able to describe what you do today? How would they try to do it?
Knowing that I came from a farm background, I think my father, he definitely knew what I did. He was like, you're a swine nutritionist. You've been around livestock your whole life. You're looking for ways to feed the animals better. And he actually went with me when I interviewed with that integrator up in Minnesota. I was by myself, and he's like, you're not driving there by yourself in December in the winter. And now he did not go into the interview with me. Rest assured, I was all on my own, but the company allowed him to tour the facilities, and he was amazed at that time at the advancement. The hogs we had at home, we were still raising the sows outdoor, had indoor gestation, kind of open front, indoor outdoor runs. And then we brought him in for farrowing into facilities, and he had never seen 2,500 sow unit that was completely indoors. He thought it was just amazing with the technology and the labor staff and the savings and the better welfare aspects of the animals not having to battle the elements in the environment. So he definitely knew what I did. My mom would say, I think she makes diets for animals. And she talks to farmers a lot. So that's
both are accurate.
That would be, yeah, they're both very accurate. So, and both were very highly supportive of my career choice.
Emily, every time we're talking about the industry, it's very, very clear, like, to see your passion for it, right? As you mentioned, you're a farm. You grew as a farm kid. How do you think this passion you have? You're not just a agriculture professional, right? You're an advocate for agriculture, as I see. How do you think this passion helped shape your approach to work in the industry and, influenced your career path?
So I am a product of divorced parents, unfortunately. Back in the 80s, there is a history for those who are a bit younger than me. The 80s was not a good time for agriculture. There was a lot of farm bankruptcies or hardships. Our farm actually sustained. We stayed in business, but it was very stressful for my parents. And so they divorced in the early 80s. And in that, I went and lived with my mom, and she remarried and ended up in a city school district, not too far away from my dad. He was 15, 20 miles away, could still be on the farm on the weekends and summer breaks and vacations. And my parents were pretty good about the shared custody. There wasn't anything, bad there in that sense. But at an early age in elementary school, my younger brother and I were thrust into an entire different learning community. we literally were the kids for show and tell, bringing our Ertl farm tractors and toys in to explain where their food comes from. I have a very good memory and a nice little story I'll share. I had a fourth grade teacher that during parent teacher conferences actually told my mom, um, Emily's great. She does good. She's doing well in school, but you really need to convince her to think about other career paths, because all she wants to do is be a farmer or a veterinarian, and women just don't do that job. And my mom basically was taken aback and said, well, actually, she still sees the farm. She can do it. And there isn't any reason why women can't be farmers or veterinarians. And she goes, you need to change your perspective, because farm wives are working on the farm daily. They're not just taking care of the kids or cooking meals. So that experience gave me my early days of advocacy, explaining that chocolate milk doesn't come from brown cows, that cereals and your food at the grocery store just doesn't magically appear from the back storeroom. My brother and I did many hosting events at our school, or show, like I said, show and tell, or science day projects explaining to the city kids where their food comes from. So I learned it at a very early age, and it just stuck with me that even back in the early 80s, families didn't realize where their food came from.
That's an awesome story about how you started, and how everything happened in the industry. And it's nice to see the perspective of your mother, supporting and saying, why not? Why does again, there are some barriers that they exist because they are a result of something of how we as a society see the world. But sometimes they are more psychological. They're not there, but we see them. So it's nice to see how your mother, your family in general helped you overcome those barriers and help you build the path that you wanted to build. So, but now let's talk about agriculture and supply chain. So, when did you first realize the complexity of the supply chain in agriculture? How was this, and how did you learn about it?
So my first direct interaction with the supply chain was probably my first job with United. As a part of the team in the R&D, we were looking with experimental ingredients and different suppliers coming in. And you think, okay, cool, they're sending us a sample. We're going to run it through the trials. We'll look at the data behind it and see how it works. But then if we actually implement it into commercialization, there's a whole lot of steps to bring an ingredient into a mill. One, you have to look at how the safety handling. You have to look at what do you have to do for the employees in the mill? Is there any safety concerns? You have to make sure you have all the documentation and regulatory and paperwork trail to know what's coming in and out of the mill, what suppliers can truly bring it. Do you need a bulk tank, or is it going to be a bag product, or is it going to be in some type of tote container? And where and how are you going to store that in your warehousing facility? Then what's the turnover? In addition to, you got to pay for this stuff. So negotiating contracts on price and how frequently you're going to use this. And then when we do sell and have the commercialization, United, as well as Land O'Lakes, Purina, and other nutrition companies, none of them go out and just say, hey, we have this new product. There's a lot of background work that goes with field trials, research trials, university trials, if need be, to get the data to show that whatever changes or ingredients or specialty product coming into the nutritional technology space is going to work and be supported. Because you can't just decide to bring in any of these specialty ingredients or core commodity ingredients without knowing that you're going to be able to utilize it, it sells and works in the product. The worst thing you can do is sign a contract for 6 months or a year and the product doesn't move and you're stuck with this ingredient. Then you have to worry about disposals and cleanup and everything else. So the complexity of the supply chain was a very on-the-job learning experience in my first year at United Feeds, is understanding how that all worked. Because again, it's not just picking up the phone and calling out of a catalog or calling a supplier and say, hey, I need this tomorrow. That's not how it works. There's lead times, there's documentation, there's price negotiations, all of these things. And there's more than one person involved. There's several teams that have to be involved. So that was my first foray into truly understanding how complex supply chain was.
And actually, we're going to cover a little bit about it, especially on like cases like we had the pandemics and how that affected our supply chain. So, well, I think everyone saw the results about the supply chain with prices, with accessibility to products and everything in their shelves. But before we talk about this and the pandemics as an example, uh, well, the pandemics showed how vulnerable supply chain can be, right? If you're
Yes.
like sources where things are coming from. Uh, how what is another example of like a challenge in the supply chain related that you faced, and how did you navigate it?
So another example that's a little bit different is when I left United Feeds, which is now United Animal Health, I actually went to work for the commodity organizations of Indiana. First, I spent a year with Indiana Pork, and then spent about 5 years with Indiana Soybean Alliance and Indiana Corn Marketing Council. And working with the commodity organizations, which for those of you who may not be as familiar, they are the direct farmer organizations sponsored through checkoff dollars in one shape or manner. The pork checkoff and the soybean checkoff are national funds that every producer pays into when they sell, whether they sell pigs or whether they sell their soybeans. And then the corn checkoffs are state organizations. And they're all slightly different. Not all states have them, but the same concept. They pay into a fund for the state to promote their product. What I learned working with those commodity groups were farmers who had, once upon a time, farmers had livestock and crops and maybe, some other business on the side. Well, with the consolidation of agriculture, we have farmers who are strictly grain crops and farmers who are strictly livestock producers. And there was a disconnect to the grain farmers and soybean farmers of who is their actual customer. So I did a lot of education in reminding the crop farmers that just because you take your grain, harvest your grains and your soybeans and take them to the elevator or the grain terminal, that's not your customer in the end. Your customers are truly the livestock producers or other grain processing. And I happened to join the corn and soybean organizations at the time when ethanol was taking off, and it was the ethanol boom. So corn now had a new marketplace. They were like, oh, our customer's the ethanol plant. Well, it gave more competition. But looking at the supply chain and the disruptions, it's about the infrastructure. How do you get your products to market? How do you work around a bridge closure in counties? So that not only impacted not only the grain and crop farmers, but that also impacted the livestock producers. You think about one of the projects I worked with on both corn and soybean was an infrastructure assessment for the state of Indiana. And one of the scenarios that they ran through was what happens when there's a bridge failure. We've had several bridge failures. The bridge collapse in Minnesota, which was an interstate. And you think about, oh my gosh, it was terrible. People lost their lives when that bridge collapsed. But what happens when there's no funds to fix county bridges or state bridges that start having restrictions, or they become what they called functionally obsolete? They're no longer wide enough to handle the wider tractor trailers or the grain equipment that goes across. Our equipment's gotten so big. So the counties has put restrictions on where road travel. So now you have to make detours. And we learned at that point in time, it was costing more in fuel because you had to do at minimum a 20-mile detour. So you think about, Indiana at the time, and still does, has 3 pork processing plants, one in Delphi, one in Logansport, and then technically across the river at Louisville, there's a hog plant. So there's a lot of hogs being moved. You think about dairy processors. There was a new dairy processor put in just north of Indianapolis, at northwest side of Indianapolis, Anderson, Indiana area. Then you have Fair Oaks up towards the 7 counties in that northwest region. How are those bulk tanker trucks moving across county roads and interstates for processing milk? So looking at the infrastructure and how disruptions can occur and affect the markets and the cost back to the farmers, because they're the ones who are going to have to eat the cost. And then the cost again, when the processors, whether it's meat, milk, eggs, or grain or ethanol, have to pay to move the product out of their facilities. Then support for the river structure. Indiana is highly reliant on a lot of grain going down the Ohio River and into the Mississippi River for grain to go out of the Gulf of Mexico. So looking at supply chain and challenges then, when we had a growth in corn production due to the ethanol boom, we had an increase of processing facilities for food. Like I said, at that point in time, we had a new dairy processor move in Indiana, and then you had Fair Oaks growth and their dairy processing. There's other ones, and Indiana wasn't the only state, and that is just my experience, how to overcome an aging infrastructure and why it's so important for people to understand, yes, it's a road. You can lay another 1.5 2 inches of blacktop, but you're going to have to repair that and replace it again in less than 10 years. Those lifespans on those roads is not what it used to be. And our interstate system, our inner waterways, they've got some significant age. I mean, Eisenhower years back in the 50s and 60s built the interstate system. And our waterways down the Mississippi, you always hear about the locks and dams and the Army Corps of Engineers who are responsible for making sure that they are still viable options and being repaired. And there's locks and dams along the Ohio River, Missouri River, Mississippi River, all through the heartland of our country that need significant repairs and upgrades in order to handle the products that are moving up and down those waterways. And then we have the railroad. We haven't even talked about the railroad. The railroad was another area. We used to have, I think, 5 or 6 Class 1 railways, and freight moves by rail. And we saw a lot of disruptions with COVID. But again, it's like there's 5 or 6 Class 1 railroads that interconnect both coasts and then go north and south into Canada and Mexico. And it costs a lot of money to maintain those. And that's how we move our goods.
Wow.
So anything that, if you think in the big picture, it just keeps bigger and bigger and bigger. And then moving trucks, the other side, a lot of semi trucks on the road. And one of the big concerns that has been voiced for the last 15 years is we need truck drivers. We need safe truck drivers. How do we do this? But then how do you balance that with all the sustainability and environmental impacts, because we're trying to reduce our carbon emissions? So there's a whole bunch of things, and ag is at the heart and soul of all of the infrastructure, in addition to all the other industries that rely on moving whatever goods we have.
And it's a primary industry. Like if ag is affected, everything is affected,
Yes.
right? It's about the food that we have on our plate. So, and how do you see the future of this challenges and this complex theme? Is this something that is up to the government to intervene? I don't know, to put their hands on, intervene. Thank you. But it's about the companies. How does that work?
In my perspective, so the interstates and roads, we tax gasoline and diesel fuel, and that's what pays for the majority of the road infrastructure in this country and in the states. And you have what's called donor states and you have recipient states. So Indiana at the time was considered a donor state. We collected enough gas taxes and everything that actually it didn't all get to stay in Indiana. We had to share our funds with other states who didn't have enough tax revenues. Think about the Upper Plains or the states like Wyoming and Montana, where the population is such that they don't have enough people or industry base to cover the vastness of their roads and interstate system in their states. So they would receive some of the federal fund from the federal gas taxes that the states individually collect. Public-private partnerships were a big buzzword, 10 years ago. You look at countries and foreign countries investing in other countries for infrastructure. There's a lot of infrastructure that China has funded in South America, especially in Brazil. They've also funded a lot in Africa, to growth and the development of Africa. The United States, where are we in that playing field? We're worried about, we've got to get our infrastructure up, because for the longest time, United States has had some of the lowest cost of production and advantage in agriculture in addition to other industry sectors, because our infrastructure was so good and we invested in it. We are starting to lose ground because now these other countries are doing partnerships jointly. Like I said, China has done investments with interstates and bridge construction in Brazil. They've done investment in Africa now. So they're looking at how are they going to feed their people and grow their businesses and do interaction globally that way with transport. but you've got to get products to the market and you got to get them to the coast to get them on ships. So they are building and investing in their infrastructure, and the US is losing ground. So whether we continue with private and public infrastructure, it's like, where do we spend our money and how do we do it in the best way to keep us competitive and not lose any more ground? I don't know if we'll ever advance to retake that top infrastructure area without completely redoing all our infrastructure, but we got to be able to at least maintain and keep up.
It's a complex subject, as we mentioned.
Yes, very complex, and it's like, where do you spend your money? You only have so much money, and how do you allocate it to the projects that will provide the greatest advantage and benefit to those that it serves?
It's crazy because it's interesting to see that there are people thinking about it and pushing it and aware of it, but I don't know if you think about overall, what's the word here, society or public awareness and preoccupation about this. It might not be a priority for a lot of people, but like the impact it can have in our lives is huge. It can say everything about how your country is performing economically, and yeah.
Well, and it's where the revenues come from. Like I said, the vast majority of our infrastructure for roads specifically is from gas taxes. And as we continue to move forward with more fuel efficient vehicles or the move to have electric vehicles, how do you generate revenue if you're not buying gasoline and diesel?
Wow.
So it's a tug of war. It's a balancing act. I believe we will get there. And people will realize it because everybody loves driving on a smooth road. Mm-hmm. It just costs money to do that.
Absolutely. And Emily, let's talk about the pandemics now. As we mentioned, it was a big shake, and I don't know, everything, like everyone was impacted. No one was prepared to what happened in 2020 and 21. So what do you think, what were the biggest challenges that you saw in the infrastructure side of things and logistics?
The pandemic and the supply chain, those together, I mean, it shone a spotlight or a floodlight on all the gaps and weaknesses in not only the United States supply chain, but the global supply chain as a whole. For example, like when I was working for Land O'Lakes at the time, and you had restrictions, you couldn't have people working in mills, and we were considered agriculture. Most of agriculture was considered essential employees. Like, we have to take care of animals. We have to deliver feed to animals. You can't just stop the feed mills from working. And so you had to think about that. But at the same time, how do you bring in products? So many of our micro ingredients were brought in from international locations. Almost all the vitamins come from Europe or China, with the vast majority coming from China. So when port workers were no longer allowed to show up and work in California and Long Beach because of space restrictions between people, or the concern that they're working in close quarters, products stopped moving. Ships were out on the ocean and couldn't come to port to unload. And then the other side of, the packing sector for all livestock, whether it was beef or pork or chicken, people working in close proximity, we had a collapse of what do we do with these live animals? And so how to manage those? Can we keep them? Can we reduce their growth rate? Can we slow them down? And there were some unfortunate and very difficult decisions on mass euthanization that had to happen, especially in the swine market. And fortunately, it was very short-lived, but it still happened. But we learned a lot on how to manage these things, like what's going to happen. What is the next big thing? We got to prepare in case something happens that we can't take animals to the harvest facilities. What's going to happen if we can't get certain types of ingredients in or products that we need because we're so reliant in the global marketplace that we don't have secondary supply options here in North America that we could at least move by rail or truck. So a lot of those things may have been pointed out to the point where we're making new solutions. So I jumped and shifted my career and landed my job with Lucta in 2022. One of the silver linings of the pandemic, we used to make all our feed additives in Europe and ship them to the United States and redistribute out of a warehouse. We Lucta has a company here in the United States in Baltimore with manufacturing. They went through and looked and then did testing of test runs or pilot runs of products to see if we could manufacture the feed additives here in the United States, because we had products sitting out on the ocean and didn't know when they were coming in. And they found, we can manufacture the feed additives here in the United States at the same quality, at the same amounts, a little bit different packaging. It's a little bit different, but we were able to do it. And so the silver lining to the pandemic for Lucta was the fact, hey, we can now service the United States, and because of biosecurity and everything else about feed ingredients and the transfer of diseases and things that we've learned from ASF outbreaks, we can guarantee our products are manufactured source with products right here in the United States and North America. Now we do have some raw materials that come in from overseas still, but we're following all those guidelines to ensure our products are high quality, safe, and can be done and manufactured here in the United States now, versus having to have 3 times as long of a lead time to get products on an 8 to 12 week transfer to the United States. Now, our lead time for feed additives in the US for 99% of our products is 3 weeks. So, and because everything's custom ordered, there's very few things floor stocked, but you order on a Monday on the 1st, and you should have it in your warehouse by the 21st.
That's awesome.
So that was a big learning curve. Is like the pandemic just highlighted our weaknesses and gaps. And then a lot of people across a lot of different divisions just figured out, how do we solve this and make sure we don't run into this problem again, or how to lessen the pain if we do have a problem or disruption again. And I think it's developed a lot of innovation in the United States and brought a lot of things back to North America that we didn't have, because we have to now realize we can't allow long-term disruptions to affect our market again in the future.
It will probably happen again sometime with a different virus or different things. So it's good to see that we have learned a few lessons, and even in terms of protocols, and we know what to do if it happens again, and the best way to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see that companies are also finding alternatives. And well, as you mentioned, your weaknesses are highlighted, they're brought to your face, and then you have to deal with them. So good learning curve. Yes. Emily, so we're getting to the end of our conversation here. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure that our listeners are learning a lot about how things happen and how things get to our table. So, but one important aspect of your life, and every time we interact, there's some sort of, conversation about it, is your family. You're a very, very family person. And how do you balance your demanding career, having to be in touch with farmers and do all the work, managing feed additives division within US? How do you balance that with, having a family? And what is your advice for people that struggle with this challenge?
Well, I'm still learning every day how to make sure you have that appropriate work-life balance. There's days that, family, I always try to put family first, but at the same time, I still have to pay my bills. So I still have to go to work every day. So I've learned in my 25-year work experience that you prioritize. You really sit down and what is important for your day. I have always put, my best foot forward and 110% effort into whatever I do, whether that's making sure I show up to my kids' sporting events that they are involved in, or helping with their 4-H and FFA projects because we're involved with that. My own volunteer stuff. I was a 4-H leader up until this last year. I've retired from that position now that my kids are pretty much aged out of 4-H, but are still involved in FFA. But they are, it's just a matter of finding out what's truly important. We always do what's important to us, and you always want to do what's fun, but you still have to do the not fun stuff. Like for me, I got to pay bills. I got to send, got to make sure everything, the household's running today. It's not a fun task. It has to do a amount of time on a certain day of the week, and I take care of it all and get it done. My husband's fantastic. He runs his own consultant business. We both work from home. I'm in the upstairs office of our house. He's in the downstairs office of our house. And we manage to always ensure one parent is home when our kids have events, because we both have to travel a lot for work. So I have a whiteboard, and the rule in our house is if it's not on the whiteboard, it's not going to happen. So it's just taking the time, understanding what's important, and identifying what needs to happen to make things work. And I'm a very deadline and planner person, so that helps me. My husband's a little bit more flexible and knows how to, what he always say, he's an expert at navigating the gray. And he reminds me of the times like, okay, you need to take a break. You've been working too much today. Like you've been working till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. But he also understands I'm working across time zones with our colleagues over in Europe. Usually it's my side. I have to get up super early in the morning to meet meetings over in Europe. So it's a balancing act, and we go with the ebbs and flows. But again, just recognizing what's important and prioritizing what I need for the day.
That's important.
Yeah.
Emily, thank you so much for the great conversation. Again, it was another lesson for me, and I'm sure it was the same for our listeners. My last question is, where can our listeners find you online in case they want to learn more about you and connect?
I am on LinkedIn. That's where I do all my professional work. I don't post a lot. I do share other repost things, but I am there under Emily Otto-Tice. And you can find my history and stuff there. I am on Facebook, but that I really try to restrict that to my personal family life. You won't see me post too much unless it's like a fun event after the fact about my kids or my family, or maybe after taking a vacation. So, but both Facebook and LinkedIn, but definitely LinkedIn for professional life.
Great. So thank you, Emily, and for everyone that was here with us until now. I'm sure you enjoyed the conversation, and I hope to see you guys in our next episode, and have a great week. Thank you.